Changing Ways, a podcast for the minds, for the thoughts, for the hearts, for the people.
Welcome to another episode of Being Human, presented by Changing Ways. And it is part 2 of what it means to be human, or how to be human. And if we learn, or if we follow the discussion from part 1, the focus therein was the Creator, and establishing the argument in brief for the fact that there is a Creator, and anyone who denies those realities that support the existence of a Creator, then fundamentally they fall into denying their own existence as being a reality. So now we move forward to looking at, in regards to how to be human, we look at the matter of perfection. And that is with a contrast. So there is human perfection, and then there is godly perfection. And human perfection is not ever equal to godly perfection. So fundamentally, without much debate, mistakes will be made as we strive to make choices in our lives. We will fall into making mistakes. And that contrast as it relates to godly perfection, then there are no mistakes that are made. There are only things that take place wherein we don't understand the wisdom, but a lack of understanding the wisdom doesn't dictate, or should not dictate, that we attribute flaws and imperfections to the one who manages those affairs, meaning our Creator, and the one who has designed those systems, meaning our Creator. And due to the fact that the base of worship is founded upon being grateful to the Creator, then we find that in being human, or in order to be human, we have to have appreciation, which if we don't, we're not able to function properly. It will have an impact upon how we live our lives. And we have to be grateful, and we have to have humility, and we have to have patience. And when we don't have these particular qualities and characteristics, we're not able to function properly as human beings. So at that point, or at the point of denial, or denying the blessings and the favors and the reality of our Creator, and that lone seat of divinity ranking as the true object deserving to be worshipped, when we deny that, we become delusional. And in that delusion, that delusion rather is constructed upon considering it proper to attribute to ourselves or others those things that should only be attributed to the being that created us. And fundamentally, that is absolute greatness and identifying absolute perfection. So when we don't have the proper perspective regarding our own selves in relation to having a creator, then this generates these particular behaviors that causes an individual to deify themselves or to deify others, meaning to attribute to themselves greatness or to attribute to others greatness, to attribute to themselves perfection or to attribute to others perfection. And when we say others, we mean others who themselves are created, as success is achieved when we attribute that absolute greatness and that absolute perfection to our creator. And this is directly connected to recognizing the amazing nature of all the things that he has created. And in that, only God is absolutely free of all needs. Only God, our creator, is absolutely free of all needs. And we, the human beings, along with the rest of the creation, are completely dependent, no matter how amazing the function of that particular creation, ourselves or other than ourselves, might be. The characteristic of being amazing is not equal to the characteristic of being absolutely great, nor is it equal to the characteristic of being absolutely perfect. But rather, it is amazing in accordance to its nature, in accordance to its environment and its function within a particular environment. But when compared to other things, we are by no means absolutely great, nor are we by any means absolutely perfect. And this is something that as human beings we have to embrace so that we can navigate within the challenges that we experience in our lives properly. Because that proper navigation requires dependency. It requires the acknowledgement of dependency or acknowledging that we are dependent. And then once we acknowledge that we are dependent, we submit to within ourselves, we submit to the point that we should only trust, and this is where the intelligence comes in, we should only trust that which has all of the necessary qualities and characteristics that can be relied upon. And again, if we are depending and relying upon anything in the creation, then fundamentally it does not have the characteristic of perfection. It does not have the characteristic of absolute greatness. So to depend upon anything other than the creator is fundamentally a deficiency. And it generates a life of misery as people strive to figure out and find out who to rely upon, who to depend upon, and then they clash or what to depend upon. And then that reality falls and crashes. And it's due to the fact that anything other than God is unable to sustain the reality of providing us with everything that we need. Is unable to sustain the reality of providing us with everything that we need at every junction, in every condition, in every situation. So fundamentally, this is absolutely necessary in order for us to function as human beings. And so we will never be human or function as a human being should function as long as we depend upon things other than our Creator. And all of that being said, what we should understand is that this understanding is the path of humility and the gateway to properly functioning as a human being. And so the Quran, it refers to, and this is being mentioned in the context of what will generate the necessary humility in conjunction with the necessary gratitude and appreciation for the greatness of and the generosity of our Creator. So first, it mentions خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ when directing us to embarking upon the path of learning, by saying, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق. Read in the name of your Lord who has created everything. And then from that which he has created, خلق الإنسان من علق. He's created the human being from an alaq, which means it's a reference to the very beginning stages of development in the womb, as that clot, it clings to the womb and attaches and clings to the womb of its mother. So this is something, in keeping it brief, one that is a proof that the Quran is from the Creator, because it's not a knowledge that could be so accurately described at that time, because it requires things to be able to be seen at a molecular level or the level that requires a microscope. And nonetheless, the Quran mentions a clinging clot in reference to the human being, describing the origin of the human being. And this should, for the one who reflects upon what is being mentioned and the reality of what's being mentioned, it becomes something that should generate humility. Understanding that our origin is one of dependency, weakness, frailty. And then we develop in layers of protection, extracting nutrients from the blood of our mothers, or being fed nutrients from the blood of our mothers, and then developing in that environment and becoming a separate, distinguished being, to the point where the blood type may be different, to the point where there may be similarities, but we may look different. And we will become individuals amongst millions who have developed in the same process, millions who have developed in the same process, millions of clinging clots, developing under layers of protection, being nourished by the blood of their mothers, and then coming out as human beings ignorant, which the Quran mentions in context. عَلَّمَ الْإِنسَانَ مَا لَمْ يَعْلَمْ. that our Creator, He has taught the human being that which we do not know. Alama bil qalam. Before that, He says, taught by way of the pen. And all of these systems of cultivation and education that we had no involvement in developing. We're born into these systems and these processes, and we're exposed to those things by which we take in or gather information in general. And then specifically, we're educated by information that's passed on generation after generation by way of instruments such as pens and the other instruments involved in writing or conveying information by transferring it from within oneself in a manner that then can be understood visually and then processed again, internalized and actualized, and then built upon and passed on. And this takes place generation after generation. So this is our origin. Weakness, ignorance. So how do we turn into something other than human? Something that functions other than as a human being, functions as an animal. How do we become one who functions as an animal? And to the point where then with this knowledge and this ability to learn and to apply that which we have learned in a way that brings about good and benefit, unfortunately, the people they end up being oppressive. They end up being oppressive in connection to what they've learned and what they've been gifted from knowledge and the ability to utilize it and the ability to pass it on and teach it by word and deed. And then that leads to the fact that we then, or the human being then enters into this condition, this deprived condition, deprived of the benefit and the blessing of knowledge and the characteristic of humility and the dependency upon our Creator. So the absence of these characteristics is a great deprivation, which hinders us from properly functioning. And with that, the outcome is that we consider ourselves to be independent, free from having any need outside of our own selves. And listen to that. By way of the gifts and the blessings of knowledge and ability and access to the creation and managing and being able to manage, being able to understand the fine aspects and the details of the creation and its function, that then, because we experience all of that information and all of that knowledge and all of those processes, we experience it at length being disconnected from the fact that we have a creator and the fact that that creator holds the position of being relied upon absolutely, depended upon unrestrictedly. And then ultimately all of that leads to, which will, God willing, we'll talk about with more detail, but all of that leads to a reality of a life of worship. Leads to the reality of a life of worship. But we're prevented from that because we feel sufficed and satisfied with our own selves and our own abilities, even though fundamentally our origin is weak, and we know that. Our origin is ignorance, and we know that. Our reality is being deficient and restricted in our abilities, and we know that. But yet, we fall into a state of deprivation and delusion so that we perceive about ourselves, or the human being perceives about himself or herself as a human being, that they have no need and that they have it all under control and that they can make everything go the way that they want it to go, or they can respond according to their goals, ambitions, plans, when they should happen to fall out of sync with the hopes and the ambitions. They think that they can reconstruct. And so we live this life of delusion. At the head of the delusion is that the human being lives ignoring specific realities associated with death. Ignoring specific realities associated with death. So they're overcome by living their lives recklessly, as though they're never going to end. Living their lives recklessly, as though they're never going to end. And this is an irresponsible response to the reality that we know of being weak, being ignorant, of being in need. And all of that delusion is generated because we ignore the greatness of our Creator and we attribute it to ourselves or other things from the creation or things that we imagine. So we'll conclude here, and God willing, we'll continue with the process, hoping for enlightenment so that the people will begin to have more productive discussions and develop a better understanding of what it is and what it requires to be human. Thank you. And God willing, we'll meet again and continue the discussion. You are invited to send your thoughts and your comments to our email address at QUE.changingways@gmail.com. QUE.changingways@gmail.com. Be a part of the process. Give your thoughts, your comments, and we'll build together. God willing.
Changing Ways. A podcast for the minds, for the thoughts, for the hearts, for the people.